Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to return to the subject of mini PCs and more importantly utilising a mini PC for Proxmox, the largely open source, freely available virtual machine hypervisor tool that you can install on pretty much any bare metal, and then from there really get creative with the deployment within your home lab or as a viable alternative to an affordable but, let's be honest, still rather expensive turnkey NAS solution. And in today's video, thanks to the guys at Beelink who have sent us this. This is the SEI. It utilises an SoC i7 12th gen processor with 32 gig of memory. We're going to turn this into a combined Proxmox equipped TrueNAS and pfSense system. And throughout the course of this video, although we are going to keep it light, because frankly the number of variables in this customization installation for a number of you are going to be all over the place, this is still going to give you a nice grounding understanding of just how easy it is to use both Proxmox and create virtual environments for pfSense and for TrueNAS scale on this system, and then from there really start to put together your own great little setup. So what do we need? Well, number one, you're going to need yourself a USB. The next thing you're going to need is a mini PC. And that's it. That's really all you need. I know there's going to be contractors there in the comments that are going to say, well, this is going to be no good for TrueNAS. Where's your storage going to live? And do you know what? They've got themselves a point. With this system's got a couple of M2 NVMe slots inside, one of which is occupied with the OS drive where it arrives with Windows 11. More on that later on, but ultimately, I'm going to chuck that to the wind. But if you do want to maintain the original OS inside your mini PC or utilising another device, it is highly recommended to utilise another drive by replacing the one that's inside, or if you have an available SATA, if you have an available additional M2, take advantage of those there for that. But apart from that, when it comes to utilising NAS software like TrueNAS Scale Core, utilising Unraid, which again later in the video we'll talk about why that's not quite so straightforward in this particular setup, I would still state that this isn't really a serviceable alternative to utilising maybe the Johnsbow that we talked about in the last few weeks, or utilising a third-party NAS like a TerraMaster, an Acer Store, a QNAP, and then installing TrueNAS Scale on those. And you can install Proxmox on these. We've done guides on those in order to do a not dissimilar setup to this, but with the added advantage in those cases of having those storage space to take advantage of. But at least with this mini PC, we can take advantage of the network capabilities of this. This system has Wi-Fi 6 on board. It only has one network interface port. There's going to be users out there that may be watching this video because you've gone ahead and bought yourself a little Topton mini PC there that's got 4 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, or maybe some of those really banging 10G and 2.5G pfSense and OpenWRT ready mini PCs coming out of AliExpress. Whatever your reason for finding this video, there are ways and means, and I would argue advantages and disadvantages to running Proxmox with a NAS software and a network management software on this single system. But for now, again, we're going to keep things as simple as possible. Let's head over to my PC and go through some of the little implements and little tools that we're going to need to download in order to get this turned into our new wacky little home lab device. So here we are on the desktop of my PC, while I'm going to guide you through the early steps of the Proxmox installation on this mini PC. Before we go any further though, just a few little bits. Number one, do bear in mind, although we are looking at this Beelink SEI 12 mini PC, the majority of the steps in today's video can be used on other mini PCs, but we're using this one because of that 12th gen i7 SoC processor inside. Another thing I'll highlight is this system arrives with an M2 NVMe inside that has got that Windows 11 license and OS inside. And if you intend to continue using that, then you're going to need to remove that SSD from this. It's very easy to do in the case of this system. 4 screws on the bottom, pop out the SSD and stick in a brand new SSD for our Proxmox installation. But if you're using a mini PC that's got multiple M2 NVMe slots inside, then at the very least you can install a second SSD drive, and later on during the Proxmox installation you can go ahead and target that drive and make that the bootable drive, which I will show you later on in the video. But I just wanted to make it clear that although these steps are being conducted on this device, there are other mini PCs both from Beelink and others out there, but this just happens to be a very suitable little device for this. Now the next thing you're going to need is a USB drive. Or again, I've already touched this earlier on, but you're going to need a USB drive for the Proxmox installation. At least 16 gig, maybe a 32 gig. Generally, if you go higher than that, you may encounter problems, largely because with the BIOS, how it interacts with natively FAT32 drives above that scale of capacity, you are going to end up with sometimes file system issues that can present barriers with certain OSs and some earlier legacy BIOSes on mini PCs. So it's recommended to kind of no higher than 16 to 32 gig, and even then those 32 gigs you're going to need other applications, even Rufus, something we'll talk about later on, in order to format them to FAT32. So what we're going to do is connect our USB drive here. And with our USB drive connected, we can go ahead, and the first tool we're going to need to download is, of course, Proxmox. Head over to the link in the description, or this one here on screen, and download the VA 8.1 ISO installer for Proxmox. You can download that. It is an ISO image there. On top of that, you're going to need another application known as Rufus. We've talked about it here on the channel before. This is what allows you to turn an ISO, which is a digital representation of a image, which is a closed system, into a USB executionable file. Now, we've already created one here for our installation here in the background, which I'll touch on later on, but that's what Rufus does. It's completely free, as is the Proxmox ISO. Another thing I'll touch on later in the video is you can, if you wish, also download the other OSs to run on this dual network and NAS setup that we're going to be doing here today. So you can download TrueNAS directly from their own site. Alternatively, you can also download pfSense, and you can download OpenWRT if you prefer that over pfSense. They do have their own advantages and disadvantages there, but you don't necessarily have to download them, because you can directly download them from within Proxmox, but that will require you to make sure after the Proxmox installation that you enable network connectivity, and therefore internet connectivity via that wired area network there. So bear that in mind, that if you want, you can upload the ISOs if you want directly from the web browser into Proxmox later, or if you give this internet connectivity later on in Proxmox, you can actually just dump the direct download links and it will download those images internally. So once we've got the Proxmox ISO downloaded, something I've already done here in the background, there is Proxmox already downloaded there alongside TrueNAS as well. And what you can do is also download Rufus as well, something we've done. Then you just need to run Rufus. You can either get a portable version of Rufus that will just boot on a double click, or you can go for the full installer that will install Rufus on your Windows machine there. Next up, you're going to need to connect that USB drive as discussed. Apologies for the break in recording. I'm starting to run out of USB ports, and unfortunately I've had to kill the camera there in the background. But as you can see, I've connected a USB drive, and there it is listed there, an 8 gig USB that I've connected there. Slightly less than I was talking about earlier on, but it will still more than sufficiently do the job. Next up, select the select icon here, find where you downloaded Proxmox earlier, and click there, and then click open. It will highlight that this is going to have to create an ISO hybrid image there, so it will go through and get that ready to write. And when you are ready to go, just go ahead and click start, and it will then turn that USB into a Proxmox media bootable drive there. Now, if you have connected this drive, and we'll go into the PC settings here, and it's not visible, although it's visible here, there are ways and means to get around that. Head into the start menu and type in the word disk part, or just the word disk, and it will appear at the top. Open up disk part, enter the command list disk, and from there it will list the connected drives on this system, and you'll see your USB drive. There it is in mine in the case of 7391. If the USB isn't visible or it has multiple partitions, what you can do is select the disk in question. In my case it will be disk 1, and then from disk 1 type in the words clean, and that will completely clean and remove all existing data from that drive, allowing that drive to be used in this Proxmox Rufus installation there. If you're still encountering problems, then what you can do is go into disk management, just put in the word disk manage, select the top option, and then from there your USB drive will be visible. And if the USB drive is visible here, but it's not visible on your list of available drives, you can just go ahead, right click and give it an existing drive letter, because there is every possibility that it does not have a drive letter. But nevertheless, once Rufus has created that image as described earlier on, popping my camera back on there, what you need to do is get ready with your USB. Here's the USB I created earlier on. Take your mini PC and make sure it's connected to a USB 3 port. That's not necessarily, the only ports you can use, but generally you're going to need to use those USB 2 ports for your KVM, your keyboard, video and mouse setup. You will also need to ensure that you have direct access to the HDMI on this mini PC in order to interact with it directly. Now, in my case, I'm going to be introducing network connectivity as well. And I'm going to head back over to OBS here, because in order to show this to you, I'm going to need to use a capture card here. In my case, I'm going to be utilizing this capture card here. This is a Ripsaw Razor HD. So the initialization screen of this PC, once it's booting, will appear for us shortly. But that's about it for my side. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce power to this. I've got my keyboard ready. I've got my mini PC, and we're going to boot it like so. What you'll need to do when you boot the device is make sure that you're tapping the delete or F2 key, depending on the mini PC, in order to go into the BIOS menu. You need to go into the BIOS menu because we need to make sure this system is going to boot from that USB for our Proxmox installation that we've utilized Rufus to create an executionable drive. This should take anywhere from 10 seconds to 1 minute, depending on the mini PC, and you'll go to the BIOS menu. And here we are in the BIOS menu here. So the next thing we need to do is slowly make our way over to the boot menu here on the top. So we make our way in, and as you can see, there is our USB drive there that I've set up as boot option 1. Don't be surprised if most mini PCs have the first boot option as a USB as they load stuff in. If it's not the primary boot option, and the NVMe, which likely has the OS that the mini PC arrives with, is, you can just go ahead and select boot option 1, and then from there select the drive that you need it to be. Again, in my case, that USB. Now, you can overwrite this if you choose. You can go directly into the boot override menu if you choose, but personally, just so you know what's going on, and during the restart, during the Proxmox process, I personally like to just make sure I know what the primary boot drive is and change it in between, but everyone is different. When you're ready to go, just go ahead and click Save Changes, and then from there, reboot your device, and go ahead and it will load into the Proxmox VE installation. And here we are on the Proxmox window here. So from here we can go ahead and go with a standard graphical installation here. It's going to load up if we press return on that main window. Again, bear in mind, if you have not replaced the M2 NVMe that the Beelink mini PC or any PC arrives with, you are going to be overwriting that SSD. So again, if you want to maintain that Windows 11 OS that this arrives with, you're going to need to install a new SSD as well, because you're not able to create a partition within this Proxmox installer window here. It doesn't work the same as when you do a Windows installation and you can actually create those partitions. But removing my camera to another part of the screen so I can actually see a lot of these menus here as we go through them. Let's pop me up there. Next thing we want to do is go ahead and agree to the terms and conditions. Again, all fairly standard stuff. You can find out more about those on their site. Again, from there, click OK. Next window, it's just going to guide you through a lot of the installation. We have to select the country we are in, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight we are in the good old United Kingdom. Go for that one there. Utilising a keyboard that I'm not used to here for this mini PC, which is super annoying. And then from there, just click enter. I will say, if depending on the setup you have, there is every possibility that the HDMI output by default will go by 600 by 400 during the installation. If that happens for you, then do bear in mind that that can be problematic to see some of these lower options down here. So do bear that in mind. Next, we need to set up that network connectivity we discussed earlier on. In the case of this mini PC, it's only got one network interface, a physical network interface, so that's going to be the one that I'm connected to there at the top. But if you've got multiple, try to make sure that you select the correct one, or at the very least have it connected so you can see which one is highlighted when you're going in there. Normally, Proxmox, if you have a live connection in, will show that little green LED light next to the EMP3 under management interface there. Another thing with the FQDN, it's worth highlighting, you're going to need to have this server name. Now I'm going to keep it simple and just call it PVE LAN, but I do recommend you go for your own server name there, and again you can amend this later on. The rest of it you can largely keep as default if you're running a fairly bare bones network. Remember, later on when you do install a network managing VM, again, like your pfSense, like your OpenWRT stuff there, a lot of this is going to need to be amended to your own personal settings there. Moving forward, it's going to ask you to confirm the settings you've created, and you can see we want to automatically reboot after a successful installation at the bottom. So just go ahead and at the bottom right there, highlight install and begin the installation. Now, this installation won't take a tremendous amount of time. Proxmox is a surprisingly light application, and this is ultimately where the base level of all your system is going to be running from for your VMs, on top of which you're going to be installing your TrueNAS, your pfSense. You could even go quite deep into some other software, running those virtual machines with Proxmox working as ultimately the most open-ended and customizable hypervisor in the market right now for your bare metal solution. That's why it's ideal for turning these mini PCs into your own custom server, or just its general VM server to access remotely, and turn a mini PC that originally was overpowered as all hell for one Windows installation into many. But let's fast forward to the completion of this installation. As you can see, during the reboot there, the system is now rebooting. We've got our USB removed, and now we're just letting this system via the HDMI output there start to boot up to the device and give us our IP. Now, as you can see, the screen's pretty small there, but what I'm going to do is just make our way in and just get that a little bit more visible for you there with the zoom in, because obviously I'm using quite a high resolution there. So as we go in a little bit closer, it's almost clear enough for us there. We can zoom straight in there. We can see we're ending on IP227. Now, that IP is what we're going to be utilizing now to access our server via the web browser. So if we move the web browser up here, what we can do is minimize here. As you can see, I've already entered that IP for us. Now, we could have used the IP via the HDMI output there to enjoy this via our web browser. Alternatively, you can use a tool like Advanced IP Scanner, which will scan your local area network, and you'll be able to find the NAS here. You just go ahead, scan the local area network. It's a completely free tool, and you'll find a NAS that way. But for now, let's make our way in to Proxmox. Go ahead with the username, root and password you created earlier on, and as you can see, you can now get into it for accessing your new Proxmox server. You can go for a subscription if you wish, but again, you can use Proxmox pretty much entirely for free straight out the gate. Zooming in just a little bit there so we can see things just a little bit clearer. On the left hand side, select the PVE server, or whatever you've named that server. Click the drop down and select local PVE. From there, select ISO images, and this is where you get to choose whether you're going to upload directly from your local PC the ISOs to this device, or you can download them directly to the server. So let's go for one example of each. If we want to upload one of those ISOs we got earlier on, here our downloads folder, and then from here I can just go ahead and select TrueNAS scale, lovely and easily, and then from there I can just go ahead and select upload, and now it will upload this ISO into the available range of images, which you can then use to deploy into each of your virtual environments there. Again, depending on the speed of your network connectivity and the size of the ISO in question, the amount of time this will differ. But what if you don't want to have to double down on your storage and you want to just immediately download directly to the server itself via Proxmox? Well, for that, let's use pfSense as a good example. From pfSense's page here, select the download tab at the top right. From there, select the architecture you're going to be going for, which is a 64-bit architecture in the case of this mini PC. And then we want to choose the ISO installer option there. And instead of clicking download, we can right click, click save link address, and then from there head back into our Proxmox server there. As you can see, it's finished with TrueNAS Scale, and instead, this time, select download from URL. from download from URL, paste in the URL we've just created there, and then from there we query the URL, it will then get the full information that we need, and then from there you can just go ahead and click download, and then it will automatically download that ISO to our Proxmox installation here, ready for us to deploy our VMs. Once the ISOs have either been uploaded or downloaded directly onto the Proxmox server, we can go ahead and start creating our virtual machines. Now, before we go any further, we have to bear in mind that everyone's setup is going to be different. I'm utilizing this B-Link drive here. It's got a nice little CPU. It's got 32 gig of memory to play with, but yours is going to be different. You might be using a different mini PC. You may be using an old PC that's got multiple SATA ports, and you're going to be relying on internal storage rather than external storage. Maybe you've got multiple network interface ports or Wi-Fi. So do bear in mind that the steps I'm going to be showing you in brief apply to this system, or chances are they're going to be very different on yours, and I am going to highlight some of those variables as we go with the installation. So let's start with the pfSense virtual machine first. So the first thing we need to do is head up to the top right here, select Create VM, and we want to give this its name. So in this case, it's going to be the pfSense VM there. Again, we're using that node, the one that we've created here. If we were running a multiple node VM with failover and high availability, things will be slightly different. And you can go with the default ID if you choose, or if you've got something specific in mind, you can. Now I've enabled the advanced tabs, but you can keep it real simple if you choose. The reason I'm enabling the advanced tab is it's going to allow us to explain the extent of some of these variables during the installation. So click next. As you can see, we're going to go with local storage. Again, this is something a device I'm using with an M2 NVMe that it arrived with. I've overwritten that Windows installation, that Windows 11 that it arrived with. But if your mini PC, or indeed this one, you have an additional drive inside there, you can choose to move these virtual machines to live on a completely separate storage space, or later on, make sure that this particular VM has direct access to that drive and not just the base level drive that Proxmox lives within. So for this, we're going to go with the pfSense installation, and for my case, I'm going to be running that VM from the same storage area as Proxmox there, but again, you don't have to do that. Go ahead and click next. From there, if you do have different graphical settings, if you're running a system that's got multiple display outputs, you can choose, if you wish, to enable HDMI out directly for this VM via one of the separate visual outputs, or if you're running a larger scale PC that's got a graphics card or something like that, you can take advantage of it there. But the hope is that with these VMs that you're going to be utilizing them via network connectivity, but more on that later on. But for now, click next. Now we have to assign storage. So again, depending on the VM and the complexity, the amount of storage you assign to it is going to wildly differ. In the case of pfSense, you don't really need hardly any storage at all. TrueNAS is slightly different, but at least for the pfSense installation, I'm going to go ahead and just give it 50 gigabytes of space. Not a small amount, but still quite a decent amount of storage for pfSense, which you can scale accordingly, which I'll show you later on. Next up, click next. From here, we're going to assign CPU power and capabilities to this VM. So in the case of this VM here, we're going to give it 2 cores, which may seem a bit aggressive for pfSense, but given this is a 10 to 12 core system, and again, we can even get into the subject of virtual cores as well if we choose, thanks to CPUs in some cases having twice the number of threads as they have CPUs, the scalability open to us is going to be wildly different depending on the mini PC you are utilizing. But for me, I'm going to keep it simple and go with 2 cores there for utilizing virtual threads. Next up, the amount of memory that we're going to assign. I'm going to assign just 2 gig of memory to pfSense, although you could probably stand to give it a little bit more depending on the complexity of your network interface there. From there, with the network bridging, this is something that is wildly going to differ depending on your own pfSense or OpenWRT installation there. If you do have multiple ports, if you want to bond your network virtual machine to a very specific port, this is where you would do that. But more on that later on when we start assigning the Wi-Fi connectivity. And when it comes to the MTU, that is to give you the ability to be more flexible with the packets of data being exchanged, and in the case of greater than gigabit network connectivity, 2.5 to 10 GBE, you will see benefits increasing that to 9,000. And then from there, our VM is ready to be created. But I recommend not clicking Start After Created for a reason that will become abundantly clear very quickly. The VM should be created very, very quickly. As you can see, it's already done. And if we click on the left-hand side of the screen, there is our new VM. But for pfSense, you may want to assign control over certain things such as the Wi-Fi connectivity here in the case of this mini PC, and for that click add and then select PCI device. This allows you to see the whole conjunction of devices listed much like Device Manager on Windows, and allows you to assign direct control and access to certain variables. In this case, I want to make sure it's got access to that Wi-Fi 6 wireless adapter there. So we're going to make sure it's got access to that. Likewise, although it should have network connectivity, I am going to make sure it can still take advantage of the main network port there. At the bottom there, our Realtek Ethernet adapter. Again, if you've got multiple ports, that is something to take on board as well. So now our VM is ready to roll, so just go up there to the top right of the screen and click Start. The VM will begin. Just click the console option there, which you can see here. We're now going directly into the pfSense installer. If we don't touch anything, we'll immediately load into pfSense there. I'm just going to move my camera around the screen here to unblock anything more than it already has. And now the PF installer is getting itself ready and unpacked. And from there, we can go ahead and start beginning our installation. So we're just going to go ahead and install pfSense. If you don't know what you are doing and you're looking for a more customized setup, go ahead with the majority, not all, of the default options here. Then go ahead with the proceeding of the default ZFS configuration there. But again, if you do have very bespoke setups there, you may want to take a little look at those if you're going to go for a more rugged or more robust setup for a lot of users there. If you do have multiple disks and you want to make sure that you've got some kind of redundancy for this installation for recovery, and you've got the storage bays available to you, you can go ahead and use them there. Next up, tap the spacebar to allocate the storage space that you can use to the VM. That was that 50 gig I created earlier on. And you can see it will overwrite that inside there. So let's go ahead and select that. Just accidentally selected that there. And we're going to go ahead and create our pfSense virtual machine running here, which is now going to instruct and install within that virtual machine environment. As you can see, it is now done. We can choose if we want to reboot, and of course we want to. So we're just going to reboot now, and this should now be accessible also, by the way, via the local area network, because we've given it access to that local network port. Again, you can configure that later, and that is kind of the whole nature of pfSense. And you can see Proxmox now going to go into the reboot there as it reboots that virtual machine, and we can choose to either let that time out because it won't go directly back into the installer. We can make our way directly into pfSense. Again, configuration of your LAN and the specifics to pfSense are going to differ wildly depending on your own PC setup, and definitely with mini PCs. Unless you're going to go down the Topton route, we can get some of those fantastic 2.5 gig times 4 ports, and those wonderful Intel N5105 or N600 systems. The majority of mini PC users are only going to have 1 or 2 LANs to be getting on with. But while pfSense does its thing there in the background, what we can do now while this is going on is go and create ourselves that VM for TrueNAS. So we're going to leave that to do its thing. We can come back to that at any time if we choose. And from here, we're going to create a brand new VM. For this one, this is going to be TrueNAS the VM. Why not? We're just going to put scale VM. And then from there, go through largely the same steps as before, with a few small exceptions. Obviously, we're going to be selecting a completely different ISO disk for the installation. Moving forward, the default visibility settings are the same, but we want to give this just a wee bit more storage for the TrueNAS installation. It still doesn't even need that much for just the base level TrueNAS, but if you're going to be using different containers within TrueNAS, or you're going to be utilizing some of those extra features there, it is kind of recommended. Additionally, if you're using a larger scale NVMe and you intend to use an internal SSD for the whole of the TrueNAS installation, which would be weird, then you can go ahead and assign more storage to that, or if you've been later on, you can attach and have access to more storage controllers within the VM of TrueNAS via the PCIe allocation that we showed earlier on. For now, I'm going to give it 120 gig for the OS drive for TrueNAS. I'm definitely going to give it a little bit more power. comparative to that of pfSense. It can be quite aggressive, and I'm leaving a lot more of the available cores to one side for this in case I want to install some other VMs later for another video. But from there, we'll definitely give it more storage. TrueNAS, by its nature, generally is recommended to use at least 8 gig, but you can really have the most smooth, stable experience with at least 16 gig. I'm going to be giving this 8 gig for now, but again, this mini PC arrived with 32 gig out of the gate, so it would have allowed us to assign more if we needed it. I'm only doing it here in case we want to assign other VMs to the available resources afforded to us here. Same goes for the network interface. You can choose whether you don't want it to have any network connectivity at all, and later on we can bridge pfSense and TrueNAS later on if we choose, as soon as pfSense has more control over the wide area network. But again, this mini PC only has the one LAN, so we don't really have a lot of that flexibility that we'd like to see there. Again, do not start the VM after it's created. Go ahead and click Finish. And then from there, with our new VM that's being created right now, we can go into the summary. We've got all of that hardware there for our brand new TrueNAS VM. And from here, go into the hardware. And again, if you have got other storage controllers, a storage card that's running into a desktop PC, or you've attached localized storage that you want to make sure that the TrueNAS VM can access, make sure you assign those options here via the PCIe. But of course, there are other options that you can add, not just PCIe devices for storage, which will then be allowed by TrueNAS to take advantage of them. Again, it's going to be very different depending on your own personal setup, but at the very least, you've got that flexibility there if you do have those storage devices connected. Once you've got that all set up, just like the previous VM, go ahead and on the TrueNAS Scale, in this case VM, go ahead and click Start. And of course, head over to the console there in order to see the full installation like you would if you were connected via KVM on a local PC, keyboard, video, mouse. What you can do is let the installation screen time out, or go ahead and click Enter. This will bring you into the TrueNAS Scale installation there. It's going to unpack the installer, and then from there, I can guide you through the installation of TrueNAS in this virtual environment there. We can go ahead, we're going for a brand new fresh installation. There is that 120 gig we created earlier on. From there, it's telling us that we are, of course, going to proceed with the installation. It will wipe this imaginary storage that we've just created, and you can choose whether you're going to go for a root user or just a general admin. In my case, I'm going to go with a root user just because I'm used to it, but again, that does allow me to have superpowers within TrueNAS Scale that not everyone is going to appreciate, use, or have the security nous in order to take advantage of. And again, I'm aware I'm skipping over a lot of security and setup options here, but it's very hard to create any kind of installation that's generic for everyone without skipping over a lot of those things. Go ahead and create yourself your password there. And in most cases, you are not going to need to create a swap partition, especially in this setup here. And again, this is where a lot more of the integrity of the Proxmox SSD and maybe creating some sort of parity RAID for the VM hypervisor Proxmox installation there, it will be more beneficial. So now we're going ahead with the installation of TrueNAS here. As you can see, it's going to allow us right now, if we want to take advantage of EFI boot, why not? It's always useful in the more modern PCs, and again, most modern mini PCs are always going to have that option afforded to us there. So as you can see, TrueNAS is now extracting. Now when it does that in the background, why don't we take a little look and see how our pfSense installation got to. As you can see, it is now fully unpacked and installed there. We've got all of the options, and if we choose, we can manage our pfSense installation pretty easily here via the command line. But most users don't really want to use that, do they? They want to go in and configure it with that lovely little GUI. And as you can see there, the IP is 192.168.1.248. So what we've done is immediately type that in to our local web browser, and boom, there is our GUI. We're accessing that VM via the web browser on our local machine, which is living on Proxmox as a virtual machine. The default admin login there and pfSense, one word, is the default password. It will invite us to change that password later on. But now, as you can see, we are now in the full setup for pfSense. We can go ahead and start setting up our pfSense system within that virtual machine there. Again, we can attach a lot of those remote access credentials. All of that can be set up to our tailored needs. I'm not going to go beyond this, largely because every step I would take from here is going to get further and further from your own individual setup, but at the very least, now you can set up pfSense easily. back in Proxmox, we can head over to TrueNAS and see how our TrueNAS installation is getting on. It's around about halfway, so why don't we fast forward now to the completion of that installation, and then I'll guide you through the access to TrueNAS here from virtual machine onto your local machine. Now the TrueNAS installation has completed, much like pfSense, we're going to have to go ahead and go with a reboot. So we can go ahead and go and reboot the system now. Even though the original installation media still lives within the virtual machine as the loaded ISO disk, it should recognize that it does have the now full installation here on that virtual disk we created earlier on. So we let it time out, and now it will fast forward into the full TrueNAS installation there. Again, it will start unpacking it, and eventually via that network interface it will give us our IP with which to access TrueNAS via the web browser on our local machine there. Alternatively, we can still use the command line via the VM window within Proxmox relatively straightforwardly. But in the meantime, if we head over to pfSense, I've gone ahead and set up some very basic level setup there for pfSense running in our virtual machine here, and it's running like an absolute dream. Again, pfSense has got a tremendous amount of configuration open to it, and unfortunately that does mean that showing what I would set up on this rather meager mini PC 1-port system is definitely not going to be reflective of your own mini PC deployment there. But what I will add is, if you want the TrueNAS installation to live within the confines of pfSense managing the network there, that is something you can do, but you will have to amend some of the settings of setting up pfSense in advance of the network controller. Meanwhile, here we can see that our TrueNAS installation has completed and our IP ending 194. So let's go ahead and put 192.168.1.194. Let's actually type that correctly, not like some kind of dingus who doesn't know how to type on a numpad. And there we are straight into that installation. Now we can enter our credentials that were created earlier on to take us into TrueNAS, and there we'll get onto the main desktop there and be able to configure our system if I could learn to type a frigging password correctly. Here we are on the desktop of TrueNAS, and boom, there we go. We've assigned it. We've got our virtual cores here, that 4-core system there. At the bottom, we've got our memory that we've assigned to the device, and if we make our way into the storage and go into the datasets, we can go ahead and configure our TrueNAS installation. But of course, this will differ wildly depending on the storage that you've actually equipped available to your mini PC. Now, USB drives do not play that well with TrueNAS if you're going to try and mirror them. It's just not going to be an option there. Again, the mini PC or even the larger scale PC you use or the storage controller will open these things up for you. But as you can see here, with no options currently available within my setup, I have not utilized any further of the M2 NVMe slots inside this system, or attached any further external storage via the Thunderbolt connection there or any of the USB connectivity. So that's kind of the limitations of utilizing TrueNAS within this scale, but at least within home lab and experimentation, there is still an option open to you. But there you go, that is how straightforward it is to install Proxmox on a mini PC and start deploying virtual environments for both very comprehensive and capable open source network monitoring tools, as well as that of network attached storage tools such as TrueNAS Scout, TrueNAS Core, Open Media Vault. Even Unraid can run from that USB, but just bear in mind with Unraid, you are still going to be loading and keeping things in memory. So the way you assign it within Proxmox is going to be very, very different and not quite as smooth running as that of TrueNAS within this virtual machine environment. Once again, as mentioned in the introduction, this is a very basic introduction into how to deploy these virtual environments within the Proxmox hypervisor on a mini PC like the Beadlink mini PC. Bear in mind that for your own network setup, depending on the number of network interface ports that you have, as well as the complexity of that network setup, whether you want Proxmox to Proxmox and the pfSense or even OpenWRT installation to have a broader control of the network doorways before you install other VMs, this video is going to be nowhere near complex enough for you. For that, I recommend our friends over at WonderTech, and of course, Tom over at Lawrence Systems has got some great guides on how to set up a lot of these things, so we recommend those channels for that. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do let me know in the comments if you have. We should have some guides linked below as well. Otherwise, have yourselves a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you on the next video.